You are so bad. Working for free
is not worth it.
Not worth it.
Yeah, when you say it like that, it sounds worse.
That's driving me crazy. I mean, this is like the bare minimum. This is like the bare minimum, but we've all been
impatient with people that do this.
Yeah. What was the date? When is Jesus coming back?
That's what it was. It was like a date, like she was, saying that like.
Was Ron Swanson selling flutes to her?
No.
If you get that reference, you get it.
When I'm vetting leaders, I say I need you to have a high say to do ratio. There's two stories that stick out to me of leaders that I've had to fire.
The actual term would be they're codependent, where it's like they get validation from needing to be needed, and so they're the person who's always looking to make a bigger situation, to make a bigger deal out of a small situation. And on the flip side, there is nothing worse than showing up and knowing I'm going to have to put more energy and effort into the leaders tonight than I am to the students.
Yeah.
And so
it comes when they're a liability, then an asset, you need to be on the same team moving forward.
Or things like that. And that can be a temptation for all of us, especially as youth leaders, for us to want our youth volunteers to look just like us.
Well, and I was just thinking, number one thing that we would avoid, this is like, and hopefully it's obvious. If you've vetted a leader, hopefully it'd be very obvious. What is it?
Well, hello and welcome into the Beyond the Youth Room podcast. My name is Ryne and this is Keith. And today we're going to be talking about the top 5 traits to avoid at all costs for your next volunteer. And so if you're looking for volunteers, which we know we are constantly looking for volunteers, these are the 5 characteristics that you want to completely avoid. So check out the top 5. Now, Keith,
yes, Ryne?
Has a volunteer ever gone wrong? Have you ever had a rogue volunteer?
I think I've shared this. I've had to fire volunteers before.
Yeah.
Numerous. I mean, not like it's very common, but there's been several, I guess, over the years.
They make fun
of
you.
You want me to share? Like when a volunteer goes wrong?
No, I just wanted to prove that we're human and we don't have all the answers.
Oh, yeah. Well, and so it has actually formed my my method of recruiting. And because I found that it's because those experiences were so incredibly hard and painful to fire a volunteer, because it's really hard. It's like, it's easier to fire an employee because you're like, well, but when you're firing a volunteer, it's like, we're not paying you and you're volunteering your time. We don't want you anyway.
You are so bad. Working for free
is not worth it.
Not worth it.
Yeah, when you say it like that, it sounds worse. But what I found though is firing a volunteer helped me to vet volunteers better.
Yeah.
And this is why we want to have this. So we're, at the time of this recording, we're gearing up for a new school year. Mm-hmm. We are, recruiting volunteers. We're open to volunteers coming at any point, but when it comes to, school year, we're shoring up our volunteers for the school year, and part of that's recruiting. And so, so this is top of mind for a lot of folks out there right now that are in the same boat, maybe a little bit behind. Yeah. As far as like getting started, some of them already started. Most of them are, at this point have already started school.
Yeah.
But when it comes to volunteer recruitment, even if you're starting a new ministry, what do you do to look for in a good volunteer? And so I think this list that we came up with, we actually came up with the opposite first of what we would want.
Yes. And
then we kind of reversed it to say like, okay, yes, it would be ideal. Like this would be the perfect volunteer, but we're not always going to have access to perfect volunteer. So what are some traits that we just want to avoid that will save us a lot of heartache to have those difficult conversations of firing a volunteer later? And this, of course, is like, there's some obvious ones that we shouldn't have to say, like criminal background, like creepy.
Well, depending on the criminal background.
Yeah, but I'm saying like if they can't pass, or if you ask them to take a background check and they're like, and then you just don't see them ever again, then you knew that you dodged a bullet. But I'm saying with that though too, there's some obvious ones that we don't have to mention, hopefully to many people listening to this. Yes. But the first one.
Well, why don't we save that one for last? Because I think we would both agree that that's our biggest one.
That one is the biggest one. Yeah.
I think let's finish that one
number 5
because I'll have a lot to talk about.
Okay, so then we're gonna start with number 2. We're gonna flip it all the way over and start with the last one and then go down.
Let's do that.
So number 5 on the list.
Yes.
Number 5 on the list.
Hurry up and get to it, man.
Impatient. Ironically, is if they're impatient, and so we know that teenagers can really push buttons, especially with camps. Like if you're in there, like for long periods of time, bus rides. If you're doing activities for several hours, someone who is impatient with a student, is not going to last very long in youth ministry. So if they're easily agitated,
yes,
if they are noticeably irritated, in a short amount of time. Not everybody has their fuse.
Yes.
Some of us have longer fuses than others. Those are the type of people that we want to.
Well, and I think what does it look like when you do hit your fuse? You know, because we do all have, I mean, I've hit my fuse many times, but it's like, hey, are you able to still control it when it does happen? You know, if somebody is impatient to the point where you're constantly having to come behind them and kind of be like, spend more time talking to the leader rather than the student.
Chill out,
correct,
calm down, like, and they become more of a liability than an asset at that point. Where if you're having to,
or if they hit their fuse and it is like oh my word, I can't believe that they just did that. I have to go behind and try and clean up a mess now. So I think it's also too now. How does somebody see that? Like, okay, before they come on board, how does somebody actually see that?
That's why, well, one, hopefully you know them. That's not always the best, or it's not always the case, but hopefully you've seen them over time. Yeah. So like, I know your method of recruitment is like you're watching them.
Not in a creepy way.
Yeah, like
but,
you're like peeking through the window at night. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. No, where you've been kind of observing how they interact with other people at your church. Do they have a reputation of being short fused or like angry or irritated quickly? But one of the telltale signs, I mean, just we have when we have a student leader that wants to come, or I mean a volunteer leader that wants to come and volunteer, I have them pass a background check first. Of course, like we don't even want them around students unless they are willing to do that. And then I have them come visit the youth ministry. And then I say, interact with students, like, just come. And the way that I frame it is I say, hey, come check things out. And if we don't scare you away, then we can talk about next steps. Yeah. And so I put it like where it's like a funny thing, like, oh, like, I'm just making sure that this is okay with me. Yeah. But what I'm doing is I'm observing them and how they talk with students. If they just like are standing in the corner by themselves the whole time, I'm like, it might not be the best. Yeah. It's like if you're not willing to talk with students or, break that ice of going up and talk with people. But sometimes even just seeing that interaction on a regular youth night with other students can show you if they're going to be impatient, like, if they're getting irritated because the student's taking a long time to tell a story. Yeah. They're like, come on, get on with it. It's like, okay, you don't have the patience to youth ministry.
To me, a big one is if, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but if they have young kids and you see them interact with their kids, like we've all walked through the hallways of church, and you can tell. Now, again, as parents, we all have our not, proudest moments, but at the same time, it's like, hey, if they're yelling at their kid in the hallway at church, there's probably a good chance it's like, I don't think if I want you in the youth ministry. So if they have kids, especially young kids, that's a super easy way to tell if like they are long suffering to use.
And you can usually tell on their face if they're like
guys, especially
tired before they. I mean, like you can tell like they're already done before they start interacting with people. Yeah. Okay. So impatience is number 5. So number 4. Yeah. We're gonna have to unpack this one because this can be a broad label, but of course, like what are some things that we can give specific examples for. So the second one is immaturity. Yeah. Now there's lots of layers to that because they can be extremely spiritually immature, where they can be a brand new Christian, which that's not always wise to lead other people. And
biblically it says
to not give people a position of leadership if they're a brand new Christian. But I think with that too, and not to say that you could never form them into a leader, but maybe like as a apprentice or like a co-leader until they just had some more time in the cockpit, so to speak. But immature in the sense of what do you mean by immature?
Yeah, I think the biggest way it displays itself is they're looking for validation. And so in a way,
you mean like from the students?
Yeah, like they
so a lot of trying to like fit into the with the teenagers.
Fit in, or I've even found like they need to be needed. Like they have a desire. I mean, the actual term would be they're codependent, where it's like they get validation from needing to be needed, and so they're the person who's always looking to make a bigger situation, to make a bigger deal of a small situation, or they're always like, well, you just don't understand, those types of things. You see it a lot, and don't want to point fingers one way or another, but a lot of times I've seen it in women who it's like, hey, they're looking for validation from the students. These are my girls, things like that. To me, that's always like, I'm just going to kind of check that out a little bit. Yeah. You see it in young guys too, of course. But I think you can kind of tell that they're looking for their friends in the youth. Yeah. They're looking to kind of fulfill a void in their life that maybe they're not getting in a healthy relationship.
So now that you've unpacked that, I can see what you're saying now. I didn't know quite what you meant by that at first, but so with immaturity, Yeah. So I mean, if they're trying to fit in with the students,
Yeah.
in the sense that like, I mean, there's one thing of just like trying to relate to them, but the other thing
Yeah.
where it's like they're trying to be cool and like, you know, and relate to them in ways that they shouldn't be as an adult. Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Or they're playing up drama with, you know, it's like, because I've seen that happen a lot,
Yeah,
where it's like
so
a youth leader
dramatic,
makes
yeah.
a bigger deal out of something, and it's like, hey, we really shouldn't be encouraging this to be a bigger
Yeah.
deal. We should actually be
Yeah.
trying to help them deal with it.
Which now, I mean, like I've seen that over the years, but I'm trying to even think like on our youth leader team now, like, yeah, there's not a lot of drama. Like, there's not like, I mean, so I think they
Yeah.
are just pretty mature people. Like,
Yeah.
that's where, yeah, and I didn't even realize, like, I wasn't trying to focus on that, I guess,
Mhm.
but yeah, but that does make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so immaturity, if they're looking for validation from students,
Yep.
That's a huge one. So, number 3, this one is a big deal. That's driving me crazy.
I mean, this is like
Or
the
it
bare
can drive me
minimum.
crazy,
This is
yeah.
like the bare minimum, but we've all
I'm
been there.
impatient with people that do this.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
is impatience is one of the ones that we want to avoid. So, all right. So unreliable.
Yeah.
Unreliable. And, you know, it's like it, the way that I put this, and I always like, you know, when I'm vetting leaders, I say, I need you to have a high say to do ratio.
Yes.
So if you're saying that you're going to do something, I need you to do it most of the time.
Yes.
And part of that is like, if you say that you're going to be here 15 minutes before, you know, or whenever we
Yeah.
do like a stand up prayer. And so just unreliable. Yeah. So punctuality is a big thing that can fall into this. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So punctuality and like dependability, like, something that we're addressing, you know, in our youth leaders right now, just, you know, cause some of them will like tell me like, you know, an hour before, hey, I can't come without an explanation. And we're like, okay, we need you to be more like, I understand like if you can't come because you're sick or like, you know, but there's no explanation. It's like, do you just not feel like coming or like, what, you know, so I think some things with that unreliability can really hinder some of the, you know, forward progress of a ministry.
Yeah. No, I think for me, unreliable, of course, the bare minimum is like, are you going to show up to youth group? Which sometimes we have to start there, you know, and we really do. But unreliable also in the sense that if they're unreliable in that, are they going to be reliably praying for students? Are they going to be reliably sharing the gospel? Are they,
them,
you know? And so if they're unreliable in the little things, chances are they're going to be unreliable in shepherding students.
Yeah.
And so that's just a bare minimum, but at the same time, we want to that is a window into a bigger thing in terms of, are they going to let their yes be yes and their no be no?
Well, and I think a lot of times, because you don't know, like if you're getting a new leader or if they're trying to serve, you don't really know that yet.
Yeah.
Unless, I mean, of course, like unless you're checking references,
Yeah.
you know, and which you should do as well, but like just to see what the reputation is. But a big thing this too is is to kind of see like, and this is an easy out where I'll say like, okay, for the first month that you're here, you're kind of like on a probationary. I mean, I don't use that word, but I'm just saying like we're testing the waters. We're seeing like if this is a good fit for you long term. In that way, like after a month, they're like, if it's not working out, they have an easy out, but also you have an easy out too, where it's like, hey, I don't know if it's gonna be the best because you haven't really showed up on time. You haven't done the things that we've asked you to do. You know, obviously grace upon grace, like, but you know, just as far as this ministry and what we're expecting from our leaders, it might not be the best fit.
Yeah.
So that might be helpful to outline that first, so that they're not like, what do you mean I'm supposed to show up on time every time?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and yeah, you use your judgment
Set
with this too,
expectations.
because we have one couple, and I would like be willing to send this to them. Like I have such a great relationship with them, but they are always late.
Yeah.
But they have just such great hearts, and they're not like an hour late. But it's like they have such great hearts, and they're really good at shepherding students. So it's like, okay, we can look past something.
is this your parents?
No, it is not.
Does your parents do serve in the youth
They
ministry?
do.
Yeah.
Growing up in our house,
Yeah.
it was unacceptable to be late.
I imagine.
But
you're
this is like the joke where it's like, you get $1 million if you invite somebody and they show up late. Who are you inviting? I like sent it to them, and I was you guys already know. But they're great volunteers. So yeah, there's some give and take there. But yeah, as a whole, we want them to be ultimately reliable. So
okay, so number 5 is impatience. Number 4, immaturity. Number 3, unreliable, and number 2, indifferent.
yes,
So let's unpack this a little bit, because indifferent. I mean, like, what do you mean? Like when you hear indifferent, like what do you?
Yeah, they're indifferent to discipleship, really. You know, they're indifferent.
They're complacent.
Yeah, they're not passionate. I think the opposite would be they're passionate about reaching students.
Yeah.
hey, if you need somebody to kind of help out with youth group, yeah, I'd be willing to do that. It's like, hey, that's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who wants to reach the next generation, who wants to really disciple kids. And they're kind of ambivalent or indifferent towards, hey, do you need supervision? You need somebody. It's like, that's not really what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Like, we're looking for people who are passionate about reaching
like a
kids.
calling, like a like a desire.
Or, hey, I'm just looking for somewhere to serve, and maybe youth ministry.
Well, and also like, so that goes into our, will skill quadrant.
Yep.
We're looking for people not with low skill, low will.
Correct.
And we're not looking for people with high skill, low will.
You don't want somebody who just wants to teach Bible, and youth might be the avenue to do that.
But you want someone high will, maybe low skill so you can train them.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, the best leaders are high will, high skill, meaning like they want to do it and they know how.
Yeah.
They know how to really kill it when it comes to, not kill, like murder, but you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about, like doing well. I was trying to use
that goes back to passing a background check.
All right. So number one, let's recap. So we have impatience, immaturity, unreliable, indifferent. And then the number one thing that we would avoid, this is like, and hopefully it's obvious. If you've set and vetted a leader, hopefully it'd be very obvious. What is it?
Pride. Pride or arrogance.
Yeah.
And
And if they think it's about them, like if they're just like, I'm here to show everybody what, what to do. Right.
Yep.
And I mean, and you can tell by just having a conversation, usually it's pretty stinky. Like
yes.
It's pretty obvious. Like,
well, and if they visit and they're already kind of saying, hey, why don't you do this or thing, it's like, ooh, it's like, I want to be open to criticism, but at the same time, it's like,
well, that was my next question. Is like, so they can never criticize anything?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. As in, yes, they can, but
the opposite of what I mean.
Pride. I mean, even if you look at Jesus, what was the thing that really caused him to rebuke the harshest? It was pride. In the Pharisees and the Sadducees, it was pride. And so thinking that, hey, I've got all the answers, or why isn't everybody like me, or things like that. And that can be a temptation for all of us, especially as youth leaders, for us to want our youth volunteers to look just like us.
Well, and I was just thinking through that lens of the two. I mean, there's two stories that stick out to me of leaders that I've had to fire, and I would say both of those had to do with pride.
Yep. And they're the hardest to fire in the sense that
because they don't think they're wrong. Well. They don't take it well. So one of them, we had set clear. This was he was like a college age leader, and we'd made it clear, hey, listen, you're not serving with high schoolers because you need a little bit of a gap. And you're like, so you're not just like a grown up kid. That's like, so to do that, we had him serve in middle school, and he was, a good middle school leader. So there's a pretty big age gap there, but we also had high school leaders that were serving in middle school as well. And I'd made these boundaries absolutely clear, but as a 19-year-old, he started to
looking for validation
with a high school girl.
Yes.
That, he started to text with and stuff, and which was like inappropriate, of course. And parents had told me, and I was like, okay, he already knows better. Like we've already said, like, this is out of bounds, like before you even started. And so, so I had to fire him, but he like was just like, well, it's no big deal. Like, which is like a big sign of arrogance. Like, it's like, what do you mean it's not big? We're clear on this. And so, so then the other one, it was, I mean, totally opposite of the spectrum. This was a female volunteer that had a kind of a minority view theologically of something that we didn't see as like a tier one, like meaning salvific issues, tier two, as in like this would divide denominations or congregations because of this belief. It was a belief on like end time stuff, but she was so confident in this belief that she was saying that if you don't believe this, I don't think you're a Christian. And
what was the date? When is Jesus coming back?
That's what it was. It was like a date, like she was saying that like
was Ron Swanson selling flutes to her?
No.
If you get that reference, you get it.
Ron Swanson from
if you get it, you get it.
Okay, maybe I don't get that.
That's a Parks and Rec reference where there's the one group that like rents the park every time when they're like, the Zorp's coming back in the end of the world. And they're like, will you take a check? You can cash it tomorrow. And then it's like, of course, like the next day they're like, oh, he didn't come. And Ron's like, when do you want to book again for next year? And they're like, this is when the world's ending. So, sorry.
But you rent flutes?
He sells flutes to him because for like their like services or whatever. Yeah.
All right. Anyways, so it was becoming a thing where she was like being very dogmatic to the like teaching the students and like like pulling people aside and be like, hey, you need to know this because this is the truth, and And it was getting a little odd and stuff. And I had a conversation. I'm like, hey, it's okay for you to have different views, like within the boundaries of like,
Yeah.
you know, but when you're saying like that dogmatically certain things and she didn't see it, she was just like, what do you mean? Like, wouldn't you want to tell everybody the truth if you knew the truth? Like, it was like that kind of like arrogance. I'm like, yeah, for the gospel, like for, you know, for the things that we know to be true, but like there's lots of different interpretations from the passage that you're drawing this from, and it's not, So I would just say, arrogance or pride can really be a telltale sign, and I would say that's like one of the number one things to avoid.
Absolutely, and those are the messiest to get out of. Like that's when church splits happen, and youth group kids is when there's pride involved because they're not willing to humbly accept, hey, I've fallen short. I can't. I've
or even admit
myself.
that there's a possibility of the wrong.
Yeah,
that's
and
tough.
I think that's obviously the biggest one. And I think to kind of look back at all of these, I think we would all agree as youth leaders and youth pastors, there is nothing better than when you show up to youth group and you know all of your volunteers are on the same page and it's just all about engaging with kids. And on the flip side, there is nothing worse than showing up and knowing I'm going to have to put more energy and effort into the leaders tonight than I am to the students.
Yeah.
And so
it becomes when they're a liability than an asset. Like, you know, you need to be on the same team moving forward. Can leaders that are really good and don't have these, can they ever have problems?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So we're not saying like you have to find the perfect volunteer because that may not exist. But save yourself a lot of heartache and avoid these traits. And I think you're going to, especially the pride one, and the arrogance, like that is, so like the number one trait that I look for in someone, even before all the other ones that we talked about, is are they humble? Like, are they teachable? Are they humble? Like, yes, they're not going to get everything right. Like they're not going to, you know, but I was like, but if they are corrected and they defend something, or, you know, it's like, hey, like that's not the wisest thing. And they defend it, then you're like, okay. So within that, how would you identify, like, are there questions that you would ask to see if someone was humble? Like, instead of just saying, hey, are you humble?
I think there's two major things. Well, I guess I could say this. Every youth leader that I've really see as humble, two things have happened invariably in all of them. Number one, the process, we let the process play out. And so it wasn't, you do this, and you're on, you know, as a youth leader. It was, hey, let's grab dinner and let's sit down and talk. And hey, why don't you come out to youth group and see it and let's sit down and talk. And then it was, hey, let's grab dinner again to talk about what you saw. And throughout that process, it was never, it's like, hey, when can we serve? Like, when can we do it? It was just kind of like they understood. It's like, hey, yeah, we're just having conversations. We're just going to see. They weren't, you know, they weren't.
They're demanding of like, hey, I have something to show these students.
Correct. Or be like, hey, like, when are we going to get to be on board, you know? And so throughout all of them, it was always like, yeah, let's meet again. Let's talk again. And I mean, you don't want to beat a dead horse. That wasn't the point. But the point was to kind of slow play it a little bit to show if they were willing and committed. That was number one. And number two, all of them have said the same thing where it was kind of like, you want us? Like, you sure you want us?
Not like an insecure, like, low view of themselves, like to where they're,
but just like, hey, I'm not a Bible scholar.
That like, I'm just, you know, the best person for the role, or whatever. Like, but so there's almost like a hint of imposter syndrome present in someone that's humble. Like, or, you know, where they're like, I don't know if I can do this. And it's like, okay, you might be good to depend on the Lord for this. Because, and so, and not just like your own judgment, but see what other people are emphasizing to them too, or like observing. It's like, hey, they think, you know, like they might not be good for this, but like they have some good qualities that would really benefit, you know, serving in this way. So
absolutely.
Okay. So good stuff. I think those 5 are ones that we should avoid at all costs. Pride being the top one, but we have impatience, immaturity, unreliability. There you go. Indifference, and then pride. So avoid those at all costs. Let's go to some rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
So not only do we lead volunteers.
Yes.
We've also volunteered
occasionally
for different ministries.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of one particular for you. You helped with VBS.
Yes.
At your church.
We did.
So if you're a youth pastor or youth leader and you're watching this, invariably, like, you're gonna have other times where you're gonna serve in other ministries at your church. Like, there's usually, very rarely,
other duties as assigned.
Very broad category of your job description. And so, what is your biggest pet peeve as a volunteer yourself? And that might help other people that are watching this, or listening to this, that have volunteers that serve underneath them, and they're like, wow, I didn't realize that was a pet peeve that my volunteers even might have against me. So, what are some biggest pet peeves as a volunteer, not just someone who leads one?
Number one, disorganized. if the person that I'm volunteering under or the program or whatever, unclear expectations, if I'm doing the kind of like, when am I supposed to be there, and hey, hold on, you sent this email but you also said that, like, to me it's like that is like the bare minimum to me. Is like, hey, if I'm and I want to be careful this doesn't sound arrogant, but it's like, hey, if I'm gonna show up,
if I'm
like,
gonna spend my time doing this,
it's like, if I'm gonna give my time, it's like, I want it to be clear, like, what I'm being called to do and when I'm supposed to be there.
And that's not even like saying that you're like above certain tasks.
No.
It's just like, if you needed me to wash, the bathrooms or whatever, like, I would have done that.
Just tell me what time to be there.
Yeah. So, but just to be clear, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. What about you? Biggest pet peeve when volunteering?
You know what? I told you what mine was, and now I can't remember what it was. What did I say?
So
earlier?
the fact, it's actually mine too, but I didn't say it because I knew you were going to say it. It's not feeling needed.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Nothing worse.
And so that's what I'm sensitive to for my own leaders, where I even, like, I had this conversation with one of my staff this week that, as we're recruiting leaders, we're trying to recruit towards growth.
Yeah.
And so we're expecting more students to join our ministry this school year. And so that means that there might be a season where some of our leaders might feel that way, where they're like, we have 4 adults in this small group of 8 girls.
Yeah.
Why?
It's like, the volunteering equivalent of that could have been an email. It's kind of like,
yeah. And so your most valuable asset as a leader is the people that are volunteering your time. Like, that's very costly. And so you want to handle that with care. So yeah, so when I volunteer somewhere and like I show up and it's like, hey, we're all, we're here to move this person, like, load up all their stuff in the moving truck, and I get there and I'm one of 37 people. And it's like a 4-man job. Yeah. I'm like, I mean, now, again, not to be arrogant, but I'm like,
correct.
Like, I mean, it's just not a good, use of resource. So, so with that, so I'm always be sensitive to that. It's like, so we're even prompting our volunteers, our adult leaders that are serving. I'm like, hey, there might be seasons where, you're not feeling like as needed, but just know, like, we're planning for growth and we're trying to get everybody on board so that as we grow, you'll have more responsibility. So yeah. Would you add anything else to that?
No, that's my biggest one. Yeah.
So lack of clarity and feeling like you're not needed.
Yeah. Warm body syndrome, we could call it. All right. Second one. Should you allow parents to volunteer in youth ministry?
I mean, I can see why this might be a question. I don't see it as a question. Like, I mean, I would say yes. Yeah, I don't know. I have known people that have been opposed to it, but the way we say it is like, yes, volunteers can serve in ministry. I'm sorry, parents can serve as volunteers in our ministry, but I would always distance them from their student. Mm-hmm. So, like, in other words, I wouldn't have them be in charge of their student small group. Yeah. For various reasons, like, just so, like, the student has some freedom and, like, some autonomy to share things that he's struggling or she's struggling with without their parent being in the small group. Not to say that we're trying to keep secrets from the parents. Correct. Knowing, but I just think it's, like, unhealthy for both if there's no detachment, and usually it's middle school students. Yeah. We do have some high school leaders that that have been parents, people in our ministry, and they've done great. Yeah. However, one of our best leaders is actually an empty nester.
There you go, dude. They are the best leaders.
Yeah. So parents that have, like, graduated and they're like,
what do I do with all this time?
Yeah. Well, and they're, like, serving, and they're like, they're amazing and they know, like, no one gets away with anything because they've, like, been there, done that, and they're like
the best.
Oh yeah, they're so great.
It's like,
so I pair them with, like, a younger leader, and, like, it's Well, and I think if you're coming from we don't want parents, because early on in my ministry, it was kind of generally like, hey, we don't really want parents, and it wasn't because I think they were bad. It's just I felt like early on a lot of the people that had the 5 traits that we were looking to avoid were parents who wanted to volunteer in ministry. Like, they needed to be with their child. Validation. They needed to be their friend.
Yeah. And so I think early on, but now we're at a point where the majority of our volunteers are parents. And dude, it's the easiest thing because you can look at the kids and be like, it's clear that, like, your parents have, they're not perfect, but they're managing their household well and see that. Definitely. So it's super
easy. So I think that's a great validation of their ability to lead in youth ministry if their kids are walking with the Lord, or, like, and okay. Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah. I don't think that's, I think that's often overlooked. Very, very high opportunity there for parents to lead youth ministry. Okay. So some 1-minute questions.
Yes.
You have one for me, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. As you know,
Only
this
1
is why
minute.
you designed this one for me.
I
Thank you.
did. These are just layups for Keith, just to give him an excuse to talk about what he really wants to talk about.
Yes.
This whole podcast would be just this if he had a
Oh,
chance.
I love it.
All right, Keith. In 1 minute, only.
Okay.
Who was C.T. Studd?
Charles Thomas Studd, C.T. Studd, S-T-U-D-D, was a missionary who was a famous cricket player first. So he grew up in a wealthy household. His dad came to faith as an adult and was praying for his 3 sons to become Christians, and they eventually did as teenagers. They came to Christ, but he kind of walked away from the Lord during his later teenage years. But then his dad passed away, which kind of got his attention spiritually, and came back to the Lord. Felt called to go into missionary service, and his dad, while he was alive, had set up an inheritance for his sons, and they wouldn't receive it until they're 25. So by this time, C.T. Studd was a missionary with Hudson Taylor in China Inland Mission, and received word that his inheritance had come about. So he decided to give away 100% of his, I think it was close to like $25 million in today's money, to different ministries around the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was more than a minute. Dang it.
It's all good. Fix it in editing. But yeah, and actually he was part of the Cambridge 7.
Part of the Cambridge 7, the most famous of the Cambridge 7, I would argue.
Yeah.
Not everybody knows the rest of the 6. But yeah, part of the Cambridge 7, just really dedicated to accountability of living out the gospel. And he served in, I believe, India and Africa as well.
Yes, he did.
And so, yeah, but his wife, he had given away 90% of his fortune.
And she said, what did Jesus say?
Yeah, and then he kept 10% to give, like as his wedding gift, like to start off their marriage, right? And she was like, what did Jesus tell the rich young ruler? To give away all. And so they gave away everything, and they started their marriage without any money.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it was kind of cool. So some of the timing of that, so that was, he actually gave money to D.L. Moody and George Mueller.
Who were they? We'll find out.
We'll cover that in another one. Yeah. And that was hard to cram into a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, so yours.
Yes.
Oh, this is a popular one among teenagers.
Yes.
Okay, so Ryne, does the Bible teach that we should not judge others?
Jesus actually tells us that we should judge. Many times people, when they quote this, they'll quote Matthew 7:1, where Jesus says, judge not that you be not judged, or do not judge for you will be judged. But elsewhere in John 7:24, Jesus tells his disciples, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. And other translations say judge correctly. And so Jesus actually says, no, you should judge, but there are 2 caveats. Number 1, it needs to be using God's judgment and his standard of what's right and wrong, not our own. And number 2, we want to judge based on, actions in the heart, not on superficial things. And so when Jesus is saying that, as John 7, he's saying, hey, don't look at the outward appearance, but we need to judge, what matters. And so the idea that only God can judge, number 1, should scare you, and number 2 isn't necessarily true. So, those are
good.
Talking about that a lot recently, where it's like, because they're in this thing where it's like, well, you can't judge somebody else. It's like, well, yes and no.
Well, and you also there's just discernment. Like,
yes.
It's like, do you go into the worst part of the city at 2:00 in the morning? No.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's like, that's a judgment though.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Judgment call. It's like, do I walk into traffic without looking both ways? That's a judgment.
Yeah.
Like
saying murder is wrong is a judgment.
Yeah.
Wait,
but murder is wrong.
Well,
killing's not though.
Well, correct.
We cover.
We'll talk about
it. Different podcasts.
Yes.
All right. So that concludes our episode for today.
That needs to conclude our episode.
That needs to conclude our episode on the 5 traits to avoid at all costs for your next volunteer. So thank you so much for joining us. If you receive any benefit from watching or listening to our content, our best compliment that we can receive is you sharing with other people, other youth leaders that would benefit from this. This podcast is always sponsored by Edge Club Student Missionary Training, which you can go to edgeclub.org/training to download that for free and to walk your students through to equip them on how to be missionaries to their school. So see you next time on Beyond the Youth Room.